Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this, the 99th session of the Finance and Administration Committee. Just a few housekeeping components. We are online. We do have online participation. In terms of the venue itself, I think you're all familiar enough with where key elements are located. We have a relatively short agenda, and we're currently scheduled to finish at about 12 o'clock. With a short break before the annual meeting starts in the main room upstairs. That's pretty much all I have, Paul, so if I'll pass to you and then we can move on and adopt the agenda. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, thanks very much, Dave. I do not have any changes to the agenda. John, I don't know if you have any. No? So we can adopt the agenda, Dave? And back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. So if we could bring up paper 03, so the presentation for paper 03. This is agenda item 3, which is the update on actions arising from the 98th session of the Finance and Administration Committee meeting. So this is a relatively brief paper. We'll just scroll through if I can. So just a reminder that we do try and make all of the actions arising from a particular meeting or subsidiary body of the Commission that includes a specific deliverable, clear responsibility who needs to undertake that action, and then also a time frame for completion. Provided at Appendix A of this paper as the complete list of recommendations and requests that arose from the last Finance and Administration Committee meeting. I'll be necessarily brief. The good news is that all of those recommendations and requests have been completed in full. As part of the table in Appendix A, we've provided the action number, where the paragraph was from the previous meeting, the actual text from the recommendation of the previous meeting, and then the details on the current status, and as I said, all of those have been completed. And so rather than read through those in detail, Chair, making the assumption that you have all reviewed those recommendations and requests, and I'll pass back to you to see if there are any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions for Dave? No. No, seen any questions, Dave.
Great, thank you very much, Chair. So we can then move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 4, and is the financial statement for FY 2022. So one thing to remember as we're reviewing the financial statement, a couple of things. First of all, the tables on screen that I'm going to put on screen are not meant for you to be able to read. They're quite small, and we're making the assumption that you have the paper available to you or you have read it in detail. This paper needs to be interpreted with the next, which is the independent auditors report for FY 2022. They are complementary. And so maybe, Chair, we'll take some questions on this component, but also move to the audit presentation, which the Assistant Director, Andrea, will present for you. So, as I said, the purpose of this paper is simply to provide the FAC with an end-of-year financial statement for FY 2022. So this concluded on the 30th of September of last calendar year. The total assets at the end of year closing sat at just a little bit over $3.5 million US. And this is the total equity or the combined fund balance at end of year closing totaled just over $1.7 million. And that is shown on screen as the fund equity balances for each of the funds, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50, as shown on screen. The fund balance for Fund 10, so this is the general operating, was just under $800,000. The Fund 20 research was negative $17,000. Statistics Fund was also negative of $175,000, and I'll go over why these are positive and negative in just a moment. The Fund 40, which is the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, is positive at just over $200,000, and the Reserve Fund sits at $928,000. Now, if I I'm not sure if somebody's fighting with me with the mouse. That'd be. But if I refer you to Appendix 1 in the paper, if you will see precisely the balance sheet for the end of FY 2022. And so again, I'm not suggesting you read off the screen, but if you do have the paper at hand, you'll be able to see the full breakdown of the assets. And so the cash in bank, Wells Fargo, sits just over $3.1 million at the end of the fiscal year. We had accounts receivable of around $350,000, so primarily from fish sales that were still being processed at the end of that fiscal year and were received in October of this current fiscal year. And then we had a couple of, excuse me, prepaid expenses, deposits, and other components that were considered as assets for 2022. The liabilities, as shown, are associated with the purchase card and travel card, so relatively small at the end of that year, $13,000 and $16,000 respectively, and they just get paid off within the next calendar month and would appear to be processed as part of October payments. We had a number of accounts payable of $352,000, and these are primarily related to the Fishery Independent Setline Survey vessel payments as that survey was completed throughout September. We wait for those invoices to be paid, and then we pay them out as soon as we receive them from the vessels that we contract. Payroll benefit liabilities is probably the other one worth pointing out, and that's sat at just over $1.4 million. We do have a breakdown that we can provide you on screen. We presented that at the interim meeting, but essentially this comes down to the liabilities associated with, for example, annual leave, the sick leave benefits, and other components that we're required. Now, as we are transitioning towards being fully GAAP compliant, we need to accommodate and within the accounts themselves and ensure we have enough assets in terms of cash in Wells Fargo or our bank to cover those liabilities. And the other numbers there for the equity, so the total equity in each of the fund balances that I went through previously. We went through some challenges, as you're aware, with the Fishery Independent Setline Survey in 2022, primarily with fish sales being substantially lower than we'd originally budgeted. We had increased costs associated with those vessel contracts, with other components of the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, such as fuel costs, which resulted in a substantial deficit associated with that account. And that resulted in the drawdown of the 40 FIS fund down to $202,000 at the end of that fiscal year. In terms of the income statement, which is provided as Appendix 2 to the paper, you will see that we received all of the contracting party contributions for FY 2022, including the headquarters lease and maintenance from the US. Other income, again, this is as we are transitioning to be fully GAAP compliant, is now taking into account the annual leave usage of staff, which then becomes an income rather, into our books, and in FY 2022 this totaled just over $181,000. In terms of grants, contracts, and agreements, as shown, we had budgeted $766,000 or just over for FY 2022, but there was a significant shortfall in the funds we received as part of those grants. That was primarily related to excuse me, the 802 grant, which funds the port sampling in Alaskan waters, as well as some additional funds that we didn't receive as part of our 20 research grant. And some of that is rolling over into FY 2023. Fish sales, as I mentioned, we had budgeted. Sorry, go on, Chair.
How much was that shortfall there?
Off the top of my head, I think it was about $178,000 for the 802 grant, and it's a little bit of a complex scenario with the way that grant is accounted for. The money that we receive in year is being reimbursed from 2 years prior, And so it's quite a challenging scenario to fully budget and account for the expected funds that we'd receive from that grant. We have put together a briefing note that will hopefully help explain that a little bit more. And I do have the manager of that project with us this morning, who might also be able to speak to it a little bit more.
Yeah, I thought the shortfall was a bit more, maybe about 285,000, but maybe that's a combination of things. But it would be useful to understand what the shortfall, why the shortfall, and how that would be rectified, I think. And I guess I'd like to go back a little bit. I kind of lost my focus at the start here. There's under other business, I was going to suggest that we make a note to have a discussion around a budget review. And basically, the purpose of that is, I think, basically to make sure that we thoroughly understand what each of the different components of the budget are being used for and how they're applied. And I think will help to really understand why things like what you just noted about the shortfall in that grant, but also in other areas as well. And I think it's been a long time since we've had much of a review of overall staff positions. And I do think it would be worthwhile to see if there's any efficiency there as well. And so I think what I'm suggesting, John, that there be a discussion under other business at later today, if that's agreeable.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Chair. In terms of the fish sales that I was just about to point out, so we did budget for just over $4 million in fish revenue, but as indicated at the work meeting and interim meeting, the catch rates that we had predicted were substantially down, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later this afternoon during the annual meeting presentation. And we were also not able to sample all of the stations that we had originally predicted we would sample in 2022. And that resulted in just a little bit over $700,000 in unattained fish sales. In terms of the budget to actuals, so again, as part of our expenses for FY 2022, you can see that the total expenditures were originally budgeted at just over or just under $10.4 million, which provided for a deficit in revenue over expenditures totaling $911,000. If you recall, we budgeted the FY 2022 budget with a deficit of just over $205,000. Which means a difference of around $700,000. And again, most of that is due to the shortfall in fish sales and the unrealized grant funds that we had originally predicted we'd receive. Yes, Commissioner.
Just wondering if inflation factored into any of this discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair. The short answer is yes. That the inflationary rate was much higher than we had budgeted for, and in addition to that, there were other substantial in-year factors such as higher fuel costs, which impacted the Fishery Independent Setline Survey substantially. We did have to bring in some contingencies as part of our contracts with those Fishery Independent Setline Survey vessels. To pay above a certain level once fuel prices reach those levels. And so that resulted, it was only about $60,000 in additional expense for fuel. But when that's replicated through, for example, other travel, 40% increase overall in travel costs for airline tickets and associated travel coastwide. It certainly impacted the bottom line in 2022. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
So the shortfall from the fish sales. So I've been getting indications from the commercial fleet that although the fishing was down, the price was up, and they pretty much broke even this year. So how much of this loss of fish sales is due to these unfished sites that you mentioned?
Thank you. Through the chair, I could certainly dig out the percentage, and maybe the team behind me will be able to dig those out, and we can provide those to you in with more specificity. It's a combination of both. We experienced much lower catch rates as well as part of the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. We don't fish the same way as the commercial fishery in some respects, that we have a fixed grid. And so we are fishing areas which we already know are going to be substantially lower catch rates than other areas that the commercial sector would target. And so associated with that, while there were increased fish prices, the Fishery Independent Setline Survey occurs within a 3-month time period. And so we missed the start of that higher price period for Pacific halibut. And then towards the end, it tailed off anyway. So I don't think we missed anything at the end of any significant value. So a combination of those two factors, while the fish price was up, the catch rates for the survey were down far enough. And that in combination with missing a couple of key areas where we know there was going to be high catch rates for operational issues with a couple of vessels, compounded the issue. And so really all three of those components did play a factor this year.
Thank you.
In terms of carryover by fund, and so just casting your mind back as we have transitioned now to full fund accounting, this table shows what the total carryover was from the previous fiscal year transition, so from FY 2021 to 2022, and it was sat at just over $2.6 million. And you can see the first row in this table, the starting fund balance as of 1 October 2021. With the various components down to the fund balances at the end of fiscal year 2022. You can see that for 10 General, we made substantial savings in 10 General throughout 2022. So we started with a fund balance of 161,000 and ended with 789. And that was through a number of active decisions, because we were experiencing issues associated with 30 statistics, with the shortfall in the grant money that was being received, but also being very acutely aware of the issues with the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. And even though the 40 FIS is not directly linked to 10 General, we knew we'd potentially have a cash flow issue. And so we made active savings in 10 General. So on any other given year, that would be a very big positive, that we were able to rationalize the operations in year to accommodate within your financial situation, whether it be through inflation and the like. So, and that also was a function of a number of positions that we had vacant during the year, and also held vacant for longer than we normally would have, to ensure that we had enough cash flow to cover some of these other shortfalls.
So the positions that were held vacant, is that where the majority of the savings came from? Or
Thank you, Chair, for the question. The majority of it came from those positions that we held vacant, yes.
and so what positions then are remaining vacant, I guess, Dave? And so what are we losing by doing that?
So what were we losing in year?
If we have these positions, what's actually vacant, and is there a cost by having those vacant? And so we're making savings by not paying salary, obviously, but so what's the cost of that?
Well, thank you, Chair, for the clarification. The primary position that I held vacant for an extra 6 months was the assistant directors, and obviously myself taking on those additional roles and responsibilities, as well as the other managers within the organization covering some of those components. So in that sense, I wouldn't say there was a big impact other than my own sleep deprivation. So it was, we functioned well, and we still completed everything throughout the year. And so from that component, it's a wonderful relief to have Andrea on board, but it was an active decision as well to slow that process down to ensure that we were making budget savings. We also had one of our research scientists depart early in the year of the first quarter of the year, early in January. And so that meant 3/4 of the fiscal year salary saving. We have reviewed the various projects that position was working on and had deemed that they were all ready to be phased out in terms of they were being closed out anyway. And this is now where we've transitioned, and we're going to be looking as well for a postdoc position potentially, and we can talk about that as part of the FY 2024 budget, to both make additional cost savings because that position is going to be a lot cheaper, but then also have it so that it's a very targeted position to meet some of the commission requests for additional biological information to support the research program and the stock assessment. So in a way, it's been an advantage because it's now allowing us to refocus the efforts of that particular position.
David, you mentioned contracts. Do we have accounts receivable for outstanding contracts that are funds that are owed to the commission?
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you for the question. There are a couple that we're struggling with a few vendors. And I might pass to Andrea, who's a lot more familiar with that, to respond. Over to you, Andrea.
Oh, mine will work now. So we have done a great job in trying to collect all of the accounts receivable right now. We do have a couple that are outstanding, and I believe they total about 120,000. There's 2 of them, and I can double check and make sure I know exactly where we are in that.
And that 100, I think you have to turn on there. So that 120,000 is that part of the shortfall that we saw of 700?
The way we are now becoming more and more GAP compliant, and hopefully by the end of this fiscal year we'll be fully GAP compliant, that income is already included within the accounts receivable for the prior year as both a liability, but what we also expect. And so it won't appear in the FY 2023 accounts, but will or has been accommodated in those numbers that you show as a liability.
And has the staff fulfilled the responsibilities of those contracts?
Yes. So this is as we are now almost fully GAP compliant. We need those invoices from the organizations concerned under those contracts before we can pay them. And that's something that in the past was not as tight as it should be. But as a result of that, we need to wait for invoices and work with those vendors before we can make those payments.
Dave, can you remind me maybe for 50, the reserve fund, just looking and sort of noticed we have a line for interest. And I wondered why we don't have interest accumulating. I mean, I realize these are very small numbers, but I was curious if we do anything with that money that's in the reserve fund.
Thank you for the question. The short answer is very little. In FY 2022, the interest rates were essentially zero. In the past, we have put that into term deposits. We don't feel at the moment that we have sufficient reserve funding to do that to any great extent and to lock it up. There's too much, in our opinion, too much risk to do that, particularly as you saw, the Fishery Independent Setline Survey was $700,000 short in terms of overall fish revenue. And we ended up $911,000 in the negative across all funds for FY 2022. And so with a reserve fund of 928,000, we'd have some cash flow issues if that was to happen again in FY 2023.
Dave, if one went back and looked at the last 5 years, what would the reserve fund balance look like?
Thanks for the question. So over the last couple of years, as you can see in the 2021, so the 1.134 million at the top here for 2021, 2022, it was the same. We didn't, as we were transitioning to fund accounting, instead of moving the funds that you can see in this top line of 161 in 10 general, 72 in research, and 108 in 30 statistics in prior years, that was moved to what would have been termed the reserve fund at the time. However, now we've moved to fund accounting. We're leaving those amounts in those accounts. And so as a result, in 2020, the amount was also $1.1 million. When you go further back to 2019 and 20, the amount was, I'm going to say, about $2.2 million, so $1 million higher. And that reduction occurred based on the decisions of the Commission to hire a socio-economist for 2 years and the 2 MSE support staff on short-term contracts. And those decisions were specifically made to ensure that those salaries came from the reserve fund and not the general operating. And so over those 2 years, it drew that fund balance down. Prior to that, if you'll recall back with the expansion series for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, I'm trying to remember the amount in what was a sort of a pseudo reserve fund. It was a couple of $1 million more. And those funds were used specifically to fund that expansion series for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. And that drew those reserve funds down to that 2020 level of about 2.2 million. But to get those specific numbers, I have to quickly dive in and pull them out.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't think you had them on the top of your head, but I guess, I mean, a general trend is it seems that the reserve fund amounts are decreasing. And you've mentioned a few times this morning about cash flow issues. So I guess that's why I'm kind of wondering how things are doing overall. And I guess that goes back to my comment earlier about the agenda under other business, about doing a review that we certainly understand where the money is going and where there might be any issues.
Thanks, Chair. And I guess the only other point I'd add to that as well is that if we go back 3-4 years, the contributions from the contracting parties were also being received either in the second or third quarter of the fiscal year to which they related, which meant that we were receiving contributions in April, May, June of the year for which they were being used. And so as a function of that, there was a need to have a greater reserve. As we transitioned and both contracting parties agreed to pay those contributions at the start of the fiscal year, it has also lowered the need to have a large reserve. And I think a couple of years ago, the Commission agreed that about $1 million was sufficient, with the assumption that the contracting party contributions were being received in October, so at the start of the fiscal year. If that changes, that will put us at cash flow risk. Okay. So at the end of the fiscal year, that meant that our total carryover had reduced from 2.6 million down to 1.7 million across all funds. And so this is essentially the money we have as our overall carryover. So that's it in a nutshell for the presentation. So we simply ask that you note paper 04 and noting that this is a subsidiary body of the Commission, even though it's made up of all commissioners. It also needs to, FAC also needs to make a recommendation that the Commission notes the financial statements for FY 2022 as detailed in paper 04. Over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Any other questions on fiscal year 2022? Peter.
Yeah. How sustainable is this? Like, how much longer can we, accrue this expensive FIS that then this year lost money? Looks like some lack of funding out of some grants that was expected. How sustainable is this? How long are we going to last?
Thanks for the question. And so through the chair, in terms of the operating budget, we are continue to be sustainable. We have the general operating budget, so 10, 20, and 30, which is funded by contracting party contributions. And so if those contracting party contributions are received at the start of the fiscal year and keep up with the other inflationary mechanisms that are impacting our overall budget, it's very sustainable to have $1 million in reserve. It will be entirely based on those contributions received. If the contributions received don't keep up with inflation, then we'll need to make additional cuts. And I think that's where the chair was indicating that we should have a discussion more specifically about the size of the commission and what the intent of the contracting parties would be with providing funds to service the Secretariat. For the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, so noting that it was $700,000 in the red this year. Just a reminder that last year we were about $900,000 positive. And the goal for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey is for long-term revenue neutrality. And so we're still tracking with long-term revenue neutrality. And last fiscal year was hopefully an anomaly in terms of those catch rates. Assuming that we make at the interim meeting each year adjustments to the design of the Fishery Independent Setline Survey to accommodate whatever the most recent market conditions are, we should still be able to target long-term revenue neutrality. The caveat is that, as we discussed at the interim meeting, we are putting forward last year a FIS budget that was negative. We've put forward a FIS budget for 2023 that will also be around $230,000 negative. The caveat to that is that we don't have certainty around what the catch rates are going to be. We don't have certainty around whether we'll have vessels that won't be able to service their contracts. Those in-year scenarios are the variable that means that we say, well, this is the budget for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey plus or minus $500,000. This year, it was minus substantially more than that. The prior year, it was positive substantially more than what we budgeted. So as long as we are keeping a very close track of the market conditions of catch rates and what we expect, and we put forward a Fishery Independent Setline Survey design that still targets revenue neutrality, it's sustainable.
I think so. That's true.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions for Dave? No.
Okay. If not, then I'll pass to Andrea to present paper 05. Over to you, Andrea.
I'm not sure either. All right, so we had our audit started in October per the instructions of the commission. It was a wonderful experience, I guess, with Moss Adams, Somerville and Associates, our accounting firm, and our team all working together. Right, so as discussed, the audit moved forward. This is our third audit with Moss Adams, concluding the 3 years of auditing with them. The cost of the audit was $29,000. We will be looking for an audit contract for the next 3 years upcoming, and we have started that process to look for bids. The reason why we'll be going out to bid, as you can see, is Moss Adams has given us the indication that they will increase the cost 15 to 20%. Not saying we won't go with Moss Adams, but we are going to do our due diligence fiscally to make sure that we are receiving the best price. The audit issued by Moss Adams was a clean audit, and therefore very happy with that. No issues arose out of the work that we have done together. And so with that, we'd like the commission to note paper 2023 FAC099-05. Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions for Andrea?
Not a question per se, but I'll just say I appreciated the presentation last week. It was good to hear directly from the auditor. That was helpful. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Neil?
Just one of clarification. So I'm just reading slide 5, and there's this piece in our financial regulations where we have to appoint a statement auditor for 3 fiscal years at a time. Can you just tell me a bit more about the rationale behind that?
Thank you for the question through the chair. So the requirement for the commission to reconsider and appoint a financial auditor for 3 fiscal years at a time is as per the financial regulations and the thought process associated with that, not wanting to necessarily assume what the commission decided when it developed that financial regulation component. But it is essentially just to ensure that you have the ability to review the performance of an auditor, to ensure that they have enough time to work on auditing our accounts for 3 years in this case, but to also ensure that we do have, as Andrea was pointing out, an ability to find potentially a more financially reasonable auditor. And as was pointed out, Moss Adams is indicating a 15 to 20% increase in the audit fees. And so every 3 years, it's just to do the due diligence of going out and seeing what the market is paying or needing to be paid for a particular auditor. So other than that, I couldn't predict why the commission came up with specifically with 3 years, but it makes sense just to every 3 years go out for a call for bids to see where the market is with auditors. Thank you.
So that's helpful. Do you think there's any value in considering a shorter time frame? I mean, I realize it's work, right, to go out and seek bids, select a new auditor, But I'm curious about your experience about whether this is sensible or there might be some value gained in a different approach.
Did you?
I think the 3 years is a sensible contract with an auditor. Getting a new auditor up to speed will be a great lift in workload. And so getting that company on board, introducing them to the people that we work with in our books and making sure that they understand our mission and how we work is, again, a very heavy lift for us. And so every 3 years would be just fine, I believe.
Richard?
So I need a little bit better understanding. So this $29,000 was once every 3 years or $29,000 every year?
Every year.
So we're required to have an audit every year. Is that financial practice? That an organization like this needs to have an audit every year?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much, Chair. And so while we're noting the paper, the FAC is also asked to recommend that the Commission accepts the audit. And so unless there's any disagreement with that, we'll record that in the FAC report. Okay, well, let's bring up the presentation for paper 06, which is the FY 2023 financial budget update, in-year update. And so this is agenda item 6. Okay. So as I was indicating, the primary reason is to provide an update on where we are with our current fiscal year spending in terms of income and expenses. But in addition to that, we're providing this to you, noting that we are continuing to move to full fund accounting in FY 2023 and also to become fully GAAP compliant. In addition, we are now aware of a number of reductions that we're going to be receiving in external funding, primarily from those grants. And so it would be prudent to ensure that the FY 2023 budget takes into consideration not only that reduced income, but then also to ensure that we're making the appropriate reductions in expenses in year. We could certainly not adopt a revised budget, and we would simply report out against the reduced numbers that we would expend, noting that it would be incorrectly referred to as how much income we actually receive. So just cast your mind back at the 16th of March, the total contributions that were agreed to were just over $5 million to the general fund. The Commission adopted that budget, and that included contributions of just over $900,000 from Canada, which were received on the 26th of October of last year, and just over $4.1 million from the US, which were received on the 10th of January. There is a slight shortfall of $65,000 from the US contributions, and we're assured that that will be appropriated later this year once a spend plan has been put in place by State Department. Should that not occur, the Commission would probably want to consider or at least be aware of how the Secretariat would ensure that we didn't expend that $65,000 should that eventuate. And so just a reminder that these are the contributions solely for Fund 10, 20, and 30, so not the Fishery Independent Setline Survey.
I don't know if this is a question for you or for John, but it's probably more John. I'm not familiar with the term spend plan. And so what does that mean?
I might have to ask Dave Moore for a little assistance with that, but my loose understanding is that there was a specific line item appropriated, or maybe not a line item per se, but a specific dollar amount of funds appropriated for IPHC through the State Department budget, and that the State Department needs to use discretionary funds to make up the difference in what our contribution is. And so the spend plan is for allocation of those discretionary funds.
So money was allocated by the, and it was less 67,000, but State Department has discretion to move some funds around to, if they so wish, to make up the shortfalls in various programs.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Yep.
In addition, at the 16th March meeting, the extra budgetary contributions were agreed to, and that includes $489,250 for the contributions to the headquarters building lease and maintenance, and that was received as part of that 10 January payment. And then in addition to that are the contributions, which are split 50-50 for the International Fisheries Commission Pension Fund deficit. And so this is the former staff pension, the defined benefit pension that closed in 2001, and we have one remaining active staff member in that plan. And so this is a pension plan that was had an actuary statement completed in 2020 for 2021, 22, and 23. As part of an amortized payments over 10 years, the amount that is suggested for payment by the two contracting parties is just over $127,000 each. This is a voluntary payment. This is not required as part of the pension plan. And if it's not made, for example, it just means the deficit will likely grow. I may as well point out that at the interim meeting, there was a question about when this would be paid off. And the short answer is that if the value of the fund did not increase or decrease, the deficit would be paid off in 10 years if it was being paid at $127,848 per contracting party. The variance to that is that every 3 years, a new actuary statement is prepared on the pension plan to take into consideration any variance to the value of that fund. And as you're aware, we've been through a very significant downturn in the stock market where these funds are invested through Mercer. And it's likely that the deficit will continue to grow. And so unless the deficit is paid off in full, it's something that's likely to be continually paid as a deficit payment from the contracting parties. Chair.
You said 10 years from, does that 10 years from today?
So, Chair, so that was 3 years from when the actuary statement was prepared, and so 2020. And so essentially 2031 was when the deficit was determined it would be paid off in full at the valuation in 2020 if both contracting parties made the $127,000 payment every year. It's a moving target, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, so a moving target, meaning that we may just continue to pay ongoing, but that's really hard to determine right now, I'm sure.
That's correct, Chair. So if the full 10 years of payments were paid today,
Yeah.
The plan would be revalued in March, April next year, and noting the current conditions in the market with, I think, about a 22% downturn in how those funds are invested in terms of the revenue, that would then be amortized over the next 10-year period.
With a new number.
With the new number, yes.
Thanks, Dave. I'm still becoming acquainted with the commission's budget. So can you clarify for me the extra budgetary contributions? Why are these extra budgetary?
Thank you for the question. So these two are extra budgetary, the pension fund component, first of all, because it's not a required payment. It's an optional payment that the contracting parties who are signatories to the pension plan have an obligation to ensure that defined pension plan is sustained or managed long term. It's not a mandatory payment. It's an optional payment that the contracting parties can make direct to the pension fund.
So I wonder if you could just clarify that for me, optional. So we could just allow the fund to be negative, but it's as good stewards, we make these optional contributions. Is that the gist of it?
Kind of, yes, through the chair. And so, for example, if the contracting parties decided not to pay the amortized deficit payments, the deficit will simply grow over time. It would just become bigger and bigger. At the moment, with the actuary report and the valuation of the plan, there's substantial funds in there that would sustain the plan for many years. But at some point, it would likely run out as a result of the deficit growing to a point where those pensioners couldn't be paid their pension.
So maybe it's just semantics, but I'm just curious about why that isn't a budgeted amount, why it's treated as extra budgetary.
Through the chair, it's I guess it's just the way it's always been, in the sense that it's not the International Pacific Halibut Commission who are signatories to the plan. It's the United States and Canada, and so it's a component that is. And maybe if I give it in context of some of the other fisheries commissions who are members of the plan as well. If you look at the, I've now forgotten, the Anadromous Fisheries Commission. If you look at IATTC, the Tuna Commission in San Diego, they have multiple countries who are parties to the pension plan, but only the US and Canada are are paying depending on where the commission is. And so those other parties are not paying the deficit, as it's a defined pension plan for Canadians and Americans.
Okay, thank you. That helps. And then how about the building lease? Why is that extra budgetary?
So the building lease, and I guess I'm going to assume this is something the way it's always been done in the books. It is as defined in the convention between the two parties that the U.S. would be responsible for paying that the building lease and maintenance for the headquarters within the United States of America. I believe it's also included within the Halibut Act. But somebody who's probably more familiar with the U.S. Halibut Act would need to have a look at that. But essentially, it comes down to when these types of commissions are formed, the contracting parties usually agree that the host country pays those headquarters costs. But as you're aware, we don't have a specific headquarters agreement. It's left to be based upon the text that's included within the convention that the U.S. would pay those costs.
Okay, thanks. So if I understand you correctly, it's kind of analogous to the pension costs, where it's a cost that really is up to the contracting parties, and in this case, the host country, not an IPHC cost per se.
Correct.
Is that okay? Thank you.
Neil, you had a question, I think, and then Bob.
It's about this pension plan piece. I guess I'm struck by how much it costs, given we have one staff member that is drawing on it. I wondered if you could just maybe clarify my understanding there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, and through the chair. It's not because the deficit is not paying what the one staff member is drawing on. It's the retirees who are in the plan that are drawing on it. Noting that the plan closed in 2001, we have a 99-year history prior to that, well, the 80-year history prior to that of pensioners who are receiving those contributions. And
okay, so we actually have, I don't know if you know the number, but a whole bunch of retired. So when you say staff, you meant current staff, but there are a bunch of people who have retired that are still on this plan for the rest of their lives.
Through the chair, correct. And it's one of those old defined pension plans where I think we have about 17 or so. It's not actually a very large number, but it is substantial because of the way the plan was set up and the proportion of their salary that they pay until they pass, and then the pension plan benefits pass to their spouse, and then they pass to their dependent. It's an old plan that is very generous, and that's why we transitioned all of the commissions, U.S. commissions transition in 2001 to the 403B plans, which are what the rest of the staff are on.
Bob.
Yeah, so the chair, David, does the commission then serve as a pass-through for these funds? Or do the independent, does Canada and the United States independently pay into these?
Thank you for the question through the chair. It depends what you mean by pass-through. The commission agrees that it's going to pay or potentially pay, and it's still an optional component from each contracting party. It goes through this process. We prepare invoices and we send those to the two contracting parties at the start of the calendar year, not the start of the fiscal year, because they apply to the calendar year. And then as part of that, the payments are made directly from the two contracting parties.
So they're paid directly to the funds. They don't come directly to the commission.
Correct. They go straight to the IPHC's account with the pension fund.
Roger. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Did you say it passes on to their dependent? Sorry.
Yes, I did. If a staff member passes away, the spouse, and if there's no spouse, the dependent will receive that for a set number of years at a reduced rate. I think we all wish we were still in those plans.
Dave, you noted that there's not a headquarters agreement. Is there any benefit to having one?
Thanks, Chair. I guess a challenging question in terms of trying to determine what would be the primary gain. And if I was to comment what the primary gain would be, it would be that transparency between the two contracting parties. We have now entered our 99th year of operation without a headquarters agreement. And so it really depends on the other elements that are normally in these style of headquarters agreements, such as immunities, privileges, clarification on the contributions that would be paid, those kinds of things, or whether there's a need. I am aware that with the text in the convention, it at least indicates that the US would pay the contributions. Under the International Organizations Immunities Act within the US, it provides the immunities that we would receive within the US. And then, of course, there's the Halibut Act as well, which does provide some additional context. So I'm not familiar enough with the domestic legislation and requirements to say that it's even possible to have a headquarters agreement. I am aware that some of the other fisheries commissions do and don't have headquarters agreements. That's probably all I can provide as context, Chair.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, moving on then. So just a reminder that FY 2022 was the second year of implementing fund-based accounting for the IPHC Secretariat, and it's working very well in terms of providing transparency and accountability and just also ease of access of how our funds are being used. But as a function of that, we continue to identify better ways to accredit the funds that we're going to expend to each of the funds. And a primary example of that over the last year is where we have now fully allocated salary and wages and all benefits across all of the funds. In prior years, up to 2021, those were simply all put in 10 general. And now we have it split in the budgets that you'll see for salary and wages for all of the staff doing the research, all of the staff within statistics, and then all of the other component within 10 general, and similarly for 40 FIS. And so as a function of that, over the past year, we were working with our accountants, Somerville and Associates, to ensure that all of the benefits for those staff are also being accurately credited or allocated to the correct fund. And so as part of that, within FY 2022, noting that the FY 2023 budget was approved within that year, there is utility in reapproving the budget with those accurate numbers split amongst the funds, and noting that what I'm saying there is that prior to that, the budget that was approved for 2023, it wasn't accurately split, and some of those benefits were still being allocated to 10 general. So what you have before you in this paper is now a fully accounted split of the staff operating within each of the funds. It's hard to click because you can only just see the arrow down the bottom. There we go. In addition, I just want to remind the Commission that as part of the approval of the budget, FY 2023 budget last year, the Commission did approve the use of $76,745 from the reserve fund. That's already included and shown up within the budget provided as the annex to this paper. But in addition, just a reminder that at that special session, session 11, the Commission agreed that the interim meeting budget should be removed and not funded, and that the meeting would be held fully electronically with remote participation. Later that year, that decision was reversed, and we spent approximately $12,000 for that interim meeting, which we're proposing, just in terms of accurate accounting, also be transferred from the reserve funds to cover that unbudgeted expense. The alternative, of course, is that we can simply try to make in-year savings in other accounts to cover it. However, noting that it was an unbudgeted expense, we have included it in this revised budget to cover that interim meeting of around $12,000. And so specifically for that, we're asking that the Commission approve the transfer of an additional $12,000 from 50 reserve to 10 general to cover the costs of that interim meeting. As I mentioned earlier, in 30 statistics, there was a shortfall of approximately $42,800 in the NOAA port sampling grant. And we have because it's a relatively small amount overall, we've simply gone in, we have changed the income from 664 down to 621,000 for 2023, and then made associated reductions in operations for 30 statistics to match that 42,850. We have done that in two ways. The first, we have reduced the sampling period back to just before Thanksgiving, and I can't remember the date, 20th of November, I think, in the contracts, for our field staff, noting that the history of landings during that period between the 20th of November and when we normally finish them, whenever the Commission decides the season ends, has been almost zero landings. So there's been almost zero monitoring of catches anyway during that period. And so we felt that that was a reasonable reduction in services and a very minimal loss of data. And then I think the other way we are accommodating is just through some of the other reductions in travel expenses associated with moving those port staff around. And that gets us to the 42,850. Yes, through the chair.
Thanks, Dave. So you have flagged this as an issue for further discussion, and I take it that's for future year budgets, or clarify that for me. Which fiscal years are we talking about that need clarification?
Yeah, so thank you, through the chair. Thank you for the question. Given that for 2023, we are talking about just under $43,000, and we were relatively comfortable in making the modifications to our expenses, I'm not too concerned about FY 2023. Noting that 2022, there was a $178,000 reduction. That was certainly something that we needed to take into consideration, and we didn't sample in the Port of Juneau for that year to ensure that we were not going to overspend. We still overspent because it was there are other factors. But as you point out, the main reason that we're flagging this for discussion is that the grant is ending at the end of this fiscal year. We are currently in the process of developing a new grant agreement with NOAA for the period FY24 for 5 years. And as part of that, I think it's time to have that discussion about what really happens when we have these kinds of shortfalls, noting that they will happen. It's just a function of the way the grant is set up. But then also to look at the other components within the grant, noting that the sablefish sampling, processing of data is also included. It's not specifically within the IPHC's mandate to work on sablefish. I'm not sure exactly when the agreement was made to do that work, but if there are budget shortfalls associated with the funds being provided through the grant, the Commission should probably discuss and agree on what should happen to staff time and effort that we put into working on Pacific halibut under the grant versus working on sablefish under the grant. And that's why it's been flagged for discussion.
Okay, thanks for that. And just so everybody's clear on this, it's not maybe intuitive how this is set up, but my understanding is the reason it's a grant is because we don't have any other, NOAA Fisheries does not have any other authority for transferring the funds to the Commission. So it's a way to provide cost recovery funds through the IFQ program. And there are issues there to be careful about with expenditure of funds that are for non-halibut species and making sure that those are being covered with the cost recovery funds, not out of the Commission's general budget. Some issues to work out there, I guess, to bring into scope the expectations for the data and available funds to cover those expenses.
Dave, so is the shortfall then all covered over all the years?
So for 2023, we believe we can cover it with the reductions that we've made in the budget. For prior years, know, and so you would have seen in the FY 2022 financial statement that Fund 30 is running at a deficit of about $175,000. And therefore we need to take the money from 10 General or from 10 General to ensure that we can continue to pay those bills associated with that shortfall in year. And that's what we did for 2022, where we made sure that we underspent in 10 General by, I think it was about $650,000. As we're trying to make those savings, funds were then used to cover the costs of those port samplers, headquarters staff who are also working in support of the grant agreement.
Hmm. So is a bigger question is whether the Halibut Commission should be doing the sablefish work?
I through the chair, I've been trying to dig around to find out how the grant agreement was originally developed. It's a grant that's been rolled over for a number of 5-year periods, and so I don't have the full history, and I haven't been able to find documentation that from the commission or anywhere else of how that agreement was made to do the sablefish, and so we're still digging, but if the contracting parties are aware of how that decision came about, that might also help us understand the context.
Yeah, John.
I don't have the history on that, but my impression has been that it's essentially opportunistic to take advantage of fish that are caught in the set line survey and have data processed that are useful for management purposes, and to try to provide a mechanism with cost recovery funds to offset those expenses. So an analogy might be in the NIMS bottom trawl survey, halibut data are provided to IPHC because we get halibut. So try to take advantage of, not squander the opportunity, I guess, to gain some data from fish that are caught in the survey.
Yeah, I think it probably would make sense, though, to go back and just review the rationale for it so that we're all on the same page, right? And also to make sure that we fully understand where the money's coming from to pay for the work that is undertaken. And that's why I was talking about earlier, I guess, John, about other business that we should probably undertake a little more in-depth budget review. And this was one of the items that I had in mind. Right.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Paul. And I think we're lined up to have that kind of a conversation with regard to this issue in the near future.
Thank you. And through the chair, the only components that I'd add to that, I guess, is that the grant is due, I think, the middle of April is when the submission needs to go in for the next 5-year period. And so between now and then, we obviously need to develop that proposal. And I'm going to say proposals because we are looking at separating the two species as part of the proposals that we're going to submit. But the commission will need to consider those, given that there is work being proposed that isn't Pacific halibut. So it's not under the Secretariat's mandate, the commission's mandate. Our intention is to provide that draft to the commission for feedback, input, and agreement or modification. And the only other comment I'd make is that this is specifically for work on sablefish from the commercial sector, the commercial fishery, so not the survey. Any of the bycatch species that we interact with, collect data on as part of the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, we publish that data on the website for open access. And so this is specifically for the commercial landings of sablefish. Okay. Thanks, Chair. Moving on, the other reason that we're putting this FY 2023 budget before you for re-endorsement is just a reminder that the FIS budget that's provided to you, and as an example for the 2024 year, is very much preliminary, very tentative. And the reason for that is the Commission hadn't or hasn't at that point decided on a survey design, for example, for 2024. And it was only at the recent interim meeting, so within the fiscal year, that the Commission endorsed a final design for calendar year 23. And so as a function of that, it's very much an estimate. And so we go through after the interim meeting when that design is endorsed, we revise the budget to match the design in terms of staff expenses, operational expenses, and that's the updated budget that's now been provided to you as part of the appendix. And again, just a reminder that the FIS Fund 40 does not receive funding from the contracting party contributions, but has the goal of long-term revenue neutrality. So the updated FY 2023 budget, noting that we went through a number of scenarios for the 2023 survey, has it running at a deficit of $226,000, just a little bit over, with the caveat that it's plus or minus $500,000 approximately. And so again, we're seeking for the Commission's endorsement of that specific budget.
John?
So Dave, at the interim meeting, we had talked about providing, I believe, an extra 114,000. So I take it the remainder of this would come out of reserves, but with the caveat that maybe revenues will be such that we wouldn't need to do that. Is that the gist of this?
That's correct. Thank you. Through the chair. Should the revenue be positive, there wouldn't be a need to take any funds from the reserve, for example. If the US was to provide that $114,000, I thought it was $115,000 in year, then prior to the end of the year when we're actually doing the final number crunching, it would either just stay within that reserve, the 40 FIS fund as a carryover for the next year, or you could come to some other arrangement of how you would like those funds handled if we're revenue positive in the year. Thanks, Chair.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yes, I don't have my computer with me, but in our FIS design, will we review that later this week?
Thank you. Through the chair, we certainly will put that up on the screen, but primarily because stakeholders would like to comment, I think, on the design. We will hear tomorrow afternoon from Dr. Webster about that design. And so he will run specifically through the final design that was endorsed at the interim meeting. There is, as you're aware, always an opportunity for the Commission to make ad hoc modifications at the annual meeting and modify that design further. Thank you.
Dave, do you need a formal agreement? There was a previous one too that I just went past and didn't comment. So a silence agreement, or do you need something formal?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do need a recommendation from the FAC that the Commission adopt the amended FY 2023 budget as provided in or detailed in Appendix 3 and as shown on the screen. Thank you, Chair.
All right. Anyone want to make a motion?
So move we adopt the budget as presented.
Is there a seconder?
Thank you.
So just before we vote, on the issue of the 114 or maybe 115, do we need to flag that? I do think we need to flag it one way or the other in the comments of how that would be, if needed, would that be part of the budget?
Thank you, Chair. If you're asking for an indication of how that would look in the report, we could, similar to what we did within the interim meeting report, where it would be included as the FAC recommending that the Commission note the indication from the US that they would provide $115,000 for the FY 2023 FIS. That would then be added within that budget that with a text that was just provided there as an additional income.
And if it was positive, then that would not happen.
That would not happen. Correct.
Yeah.
And Dave, what would be the timing? When would we have a sense of whether that's needed?
Thank you. Through the chair. One of the issues that we do have with the survey is that it's not really an issue. One of the functions of the survey operating within a 3-month period is that as we are selling fish from the first month, our accountants will close out the books by the 21st of the next month, which means that for the first month of the FIS, we won't really know until the 21st of the next month what's happening. And that's only 1/3 of the survey season. And so we're really looking at the 21st of the third month before we have an idea of what 2/3 of the survey is going to look like. And so there's very little opportunity to make any changes. But in terms of answering your question of when we'll know whether the survey is going to be positive or negative overall, it really won't be until the 21st of October. So it'll be within the next fiscal year that payment would be made, if you were going to make it once we knew.
All right, we may have to have a follow-up discussion on that and the
Okay.
mechanics with federal fiscal years and so
Sure.
forth.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bob.
Through the chair, David, I've been trying to promote the last couple of months some boats to participate in the FIS. And I don't know if this discussion should be later in the week. But there was a discussion by some of the captains about the 8 skate issue, and they said they had been talking to you and your people. So should that be delayed till later in the week, or type of discussion, or?
Probably, sorry, through the chair. I think tomorrow when we have the discussion around the survey design is the most
Okay.
logical. But at the same time, I think because we're in a smaller group, even though it's webcast, the issue that we're encountering, and I know the team is working hard to find areas within the design that we can only have 6 gates. The issue that we have is that as soon as we reduce it down to 6 gates from those that were adopted at the interim meeting from 8 gates, is that deficit grows significantly. And so it's a bit of a catch-22 in many respects, where we're trying to accommodate as much as possible the needs to attract the bids in the first place, but at the same time, very conscious that we can't make the bids in some areas very attractive, because the FIS might not survive too many years if we keep doing that. It's a challenging thing to work through. And I'll just point out as well that the FIS team is holding on Thursday night, I think it is, a public discussion with all of the Fishery Independent Setline Survey skippers who are potential bidders and tenders, to walk through any other questions about the bids that have gone out, and see if we can get some additional feedback on how to improve the operation of the survey. And then I think the tenders are not due until next week, or is it the week after? Yeah. Through Peter.
Yeah, through the chair. Just to expand on that, has there, I mean, obviously not this round, but has there ever been any consideration to putting out bids for 6 and 8 skates for similar areas? And then you would actually see some costs versus the benefits, and weighing that. Is that a possible thing for folks to bid on a 6 skater and an 8 skate scenario, say for, Goose Island area or something?
Say, Dave, just before you answer, going back to the motion, we never formally adopted it one way or another. So I think we need to do that. And then we can move on to the issue that Bob did. So I think the question for you, John, is that we need to do some wordsmithing for the report going forward so that it would be captured in this discussion for the 114,000. Yeah, because it sounds like there might be some tricky maneuvering fiscally if it's one year over the other. So I think we need to capture
Yeah,
that.
I have some thoughts on how to do it, but yeah, I think wordsmithing is in order.
So with that in mind, is there anyone opposed to the motion?
Paul, before we do, if I may, I just want to note that separate from today's discussion, we'd still like to have a conversation about contracting party contributions. And
Yeah.
you're aware of the issue, but just wanted to raise that.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have time for that and a few other items this week. So anyone opposed? No. So back to Pete. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
So as part of that, we're agreeing in 2024 to a 10% increase due to, okay,
We haven't got to that yet.
yeah, okay.
And there was one, yeah, okay, so there's no one opposed, Dave. And we will draft up some language to incorporate into the report.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. And so through the Chair to answer Commissioner DeGreef's question and maybe to seek clarification, were you suggesting a tandem run survey of a vessel with 6 and 8 skates, or offering for bidders to bid as either 6 skates or 8 skates, and then we'd select one of those?
Yeah, I was suggesting the latter, that folks could, bid on each one, and then you may be able to determine better, the costs, because that's the real, that's your real cost.
Through the Chair, I guess my only hesitation there is based on the discussions we've been having with our vessel captains, is that they would only bid as 6 skates. It's common knowledge amongst our vessel captains and Secretariat staff that there is an overwhelming preference for 6 skates. And I don't think we'd actually get any bids on 8 skates, but it's uncertain.
Yeah, I understand that. However, I do believe, I'm not certain, I'm not in the bidding process, but I do believe they may inflate the 8 skates to a point where it's, folks may do that if they're very, very resistant to doing that. So just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, Chair, what I'd suggest then, I think Kayla's behind me, is that we'll take note. And so for that Thursday meeting, prior to that meeting, we'll work through a scenario where maybe we're able to request at least some example bids of to compare and contrast 6 and 8 skates, and work through that. But I'd need to work with the team a little bit to see how we could potentially do that without compromising this tender.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting this tender, but
Okay.
maybe possibly in the future.
Okay.
Consideration. Thank you.
All right. Maybe we take a 10-minute break before we move on to the next item. We're finished with 2023 update, I take it?
Correct.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, well, thank you, Chair, and welcome back, everybody. So we are now going to move on to Agenda Item 7, and Paper 7 in particular, which is the budget estimates for 2024 for approval and for information, both 2025 and 2026, in accordance with the financial regulations. In terms of background, so in accordance with Regulation 5, Para 3 of the financial regulations, we are required to provide those budget proposals for 3 fiscal years. And so, as I said, 23, 24, and 25, and noting that we're actually at the end of the first quarter of 2023, not 22 there. And so those budgets have been provided to you 30 days in advance of the FAC for review. Screen to work. In terms of the FY 2024 budget, which is proposed for adoption and provided at Appendix 1, the key things to note is that the base contributions include an approximate 10% increase, which totals $608,208 and some change. which, as I said, is an increase from the FY 2023, 22, and 21 budgets, which were frozen for the contracting parties. So this means that the requested base contribution from Canada is just over $1 million, and from the US just over $4.6 million, based on the current split between the two contracting parties for FY 2023. Some of the general assumptions that are associated with the proposed increase are increases in our operation costs at the Secretariat and more broadly, coast-wide operations in various ports. Salaries and wages, which represents a 3.5% increase, but which is based on the cost of living and step increases that we would expect to incur during 2024. And also the standard estimate for healthcare costs, health insurance and the like, of 12%. The IPHC budget, as I've indicated, has been frozen for the last 3 fiscal years in terms of contracting party contributions. And so this 10% approximately equals a 3.33% increase annually since the first year the budget was frozen. The headquarters lease and maintenance associated with the lease that was signed, the building lease that was signed in 2023, will increase to $513,000 and some change. And the Fishery Independent Setline Survey Fund 40 budget, as I was indicating for 2023, is very tentative. And so at the moment, even though we're asking for 2024 to be approved for contracting party contributions, and we have proposed a Fund 40 budget for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, just note that it's very tentative until the next interim meeting in November of 2023, when you'll approve the design for 2024. The deficit payments for the International Fisheries Commission Pension Fund remain at $127,000 as part of that 10-year amortization of the deficit payments. And as pointed out earlier, we have one remaining active staff member who is paying into the fund, and the rest are all retired or no longer actively participating. So I don't expect you to read what's on the screen, but rather in the paper, and having had review Appendix 1, which proposes the financial budget for adoption for 2024. And we can walk through some of those changes as you see fit. I wanted to point out a few additional details before we have that discussion though. In 2023, we were able to hold several positions vacant to compensate for the budget freeze for the 3rd year running. However, in these figures that we're putting forward to you, we've assumed zero vacancy. So all of the FTEs, the 33 FTEs that we have within the Secretariat, are being accounted for as part of this budget. Noting that it was an expression at the interim meeting that it may not be palatable to increase the budget by this 10%. The Commission would at some point later today need to consider how to make some other active cost reductions, and noting that for our general operating funds 10, 20, and 30, salaries, wages, and benefits take up about 76.5% of the budget, and our overall operating expenses of 23.5%. To make a reduction of that 10%, which is about $608,000, I think I recall, it would require some discussion about salaries, wages, and benefits. Yes.
Dave, 2 questions. One is, can you tell us what the currently vacant FTE was used for? And secondly, you note here that if the 10% increase is not approved, you'd be looking at another FTE reduction. And so are you anticipating that there will be another vacant position that you simply wouldn't fill, or could you clarify how that would happen?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. In terms of how the funds were used in FY 2022 for that vacant position, those funds were simply saved, and that's why we had that carryover and saving of about $650,000. And so those funds just weren't spent, and that position wasn't filled.
Sorry, I understood that, but what had that position been used for the last time it was filled?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Through the chair. And so that position was the research scientist position that we had.
Okay, and then for an additional FTE cut, what's your response there?
So it's one of those, I guess, conversations which is a little challenging in the sense that we don't know, and we don't necessarily, or we don't want staff to depart the organization. And so in a way, we're having a discussion about making an assumption that if there was a departure from the organization, would we or would we not fill it? And at this point, we don't have anybody who's making indication that they're looking to depart the organization in the fiscal year. So it's a little bit hard to put a finger on. But we could certainly have that discussion, and I know we had that discussion last year at the special session about simply if there was a vacancy that came up, that we wouldn't fill it for a period of time to ensure that if there was a difference, we were making those active in-year savings.
Okay, thanks. And then as a follow-up, I'm not seeing that you've flagged any other potential options, other aspects of the IPHC budget aside from an FTE reduction. So have you looked at that?
We have, and so through the chair, with the 2024 budget for operating expenses being about 23.5%, so $1.7 million, I think it would be a combination if we weren't to receive that $608,000 at all. It would be a matter of finding some savings in salaries, wages, and benefits, and then also operating expenses. And there is always ways you can reduce operating expenses, whether it's reducing travel, whether it's reducing meetings. And I do have some slides which make some of those suggestions. I did have a slide which is just on the screen about the building lease and maintenance costs, but I think it's just give you a bit more information about the breakdown of what the actual base rent charges are of $387,000 for 2024, and an estimated $144,000 for those associated lease building expenses that we pay. Which is approximately 35% of the building. There's 3 full floors in the building, and we pay for all of them, the maintenance for one of those floors. Just to note as well that the headquarters lease will expire on the 30th of September, 2025. And so very shortly, we will need to start to have a discussion about whether we need to look for alternative premises or engage with our landlords to negotiate a new lease. So before I jump into some of those extra options, just a reminder that we're asking you formally as part of the process to note the paper, but then also the Commission adopts the FY 2024 budget. And I understand that there's going to be a lot more discussion about whether that's possible at this meeting. So I do have a couple of slides about that may feed into some of those discussions, particularly on meetings, but then also contributions. And I'm not sure if you want to see those now or whether you want to hold those for other business. So I'll ask the chair.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So, John, earlier I spoke about, I think there is a need to have a comprehensive review of the budget, and given that Dave's flagged seeking a 10% increase, I think we need to understand what our options are, which would then flow out of a review. I was thinking that we'd spend a bit of time on the review, not at this meeting, but over the course of the next month or so or two, and then come back with a decision for 2024 following that review, rather than get into it today. I think Dave can show us the extra slides that would help, but I think we'll probably have other questions as well as we go along.
Yeah, I think that's entirely appropriate. It's a good suggestion.
Neil?
I was just curious to hear from you about whether the increases on the healthcare costs are typical year to year or not.
Thank you. So through the chair, typically it's pretty much a standard to budget around a 12% increase each year. It does vary, and last year was the first year that it was substantially lower than that. But maybe Andrea, do you have some more context that you could provide?
Yes. So in budgeting for healthcare costs, you are supposed to budget anywhere from 8 to 14%. So we did budget a 12% increase in that. Like Dave has referenced, this was the first year I have ever seen our healthcare costs actually go down in any organization that I have overseen. The largest one I've ever seen is a 22% increase. And so safely, we want to budget that 12%.
And if I could, as a proportion of the sort of total, like what not exactly, but roughly, what does that amount to in terms of the overall budget? Like if that were the scope of the increase we account for, how big is that number in sort of dollar terms?
You give you a couple minutes, I will
Yeah,
go
no
and
problem.
check. Thank you.
I can quickly speak to that. And so for 2024, we have across all funds, so including the FIS, the medical premiums are $727,000.
All right, Dave, what John and I just discussed, is that a path forward that works for the Secretariat?
Yes, very, very much so, Chair. I think it sounds as though there's going to be some additional questions and a lot more detail that we'd need to come up with and provide that we don't normally provide at the FAC meeting. We have those detailed spreadsheets of the full budget breakdown, and that's something that we make sure we distribute to review as part of that discussion intersessionally.
All right, and so then we report out on the FAC Tuesday, tomorrow in the afternoon, I think.
I think that one's on Thursday afternoon.
Thursday afternoon?
So we
Okay.
have a bit of time.
All right, so then we will provide comments to yourself, Andrea, as far as the report. Okay, so, and then we'll share that and get that resolved so we can report out on Thursday. Did you want to show the extra slides? Just to give us an
I
idea.
think I can give just a little bit of an overview. So there's a couple there in terms of some broad secretariat structure and functions. And so this is more or less what's available on the website as part of the overall structure of the secretariat. And we lay out as part of our compendium of position descriptions for the organization exactly how we function as an organization. And so even though, for example, we have a fisheries policy branch, which only has one full-time FTE, it's a core function that we've separated out. Similarly, we have our finance and personnel services, which is broken down to a number of core areas. And then we have our fishery independent set line survey, which sort of sits off to the side in overall structure. In terms of other options for reducing costs, that don't involve FTEs. We do have the interim meeting, which was flagged last year and agreed to not hold in person. And so we would estimate next year, 2024, that we'd spend about $13,500 for that 2-day meeting in person. So that is one way of making a small saving. We also have the MSAB discussion, which has been ongoing at the Commission, and there's a Commission request at the moment to propose potential amendments to the rules of procedure for the Management Strategy Advisory Board. We spend about $40,000 for each in-person meeting, and the next meeting is scheduled currently in October, so it would fall within the 2024 fiscal year. There are other ways that we could restructure the meetings. A couple of years ago, there was discussions surrounding the conference board and processor advisory board, and the option to combine those two boards as a broader stakeholder group.